Welcome to the Anxious Love Coach podcast, a place for creating meaningful, conscious, secure, long-term partnerships. Here, we talk relationship anxiety and creating healthy, magnetic dynamics within partnership to help you feel confident and alive within committed partnership. My name is Natalie Kennedy, and I'm your host. I'm a relationship anxiety coach and meditation teacher. I've worked with hundreds of clients battling anxiety, and after experiencing extraordinary shifts in my own healing relative to partnership, now combine my lived personal experience and professional training to help others trust themselves within relationship and in their lives. I've been to the edge and back with my now husband from relationship anxiety and come out confidently to the other side. I want to pass the tools I've learned along to you to help you trust yourself in relationships and also create magnetic, hot dynamics with your partner. I believe lots of mainstream relationship advice today can make us anxious and dissatisfied. So let's jump in and normalize challenges that modern relationships and real people go through while also giving you tools to trust yourself, drop the shame, and alchemize your messy, twisted relational truths into profound inner wisdom and aliveness. If you haven't yet, be sure to join my communities over on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Anxious Love Coach. You can also request a 30-minute relationship anxiety assessment with me depending on availability, or ask me a question over on my website at www.anxiouslovecoach.com. I've also got a wonderful relationship anxiety meditation available to you as thanks for subscribing to my email list. Thanks for being here and enjoy this episode. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for being here. Today's episode is about the ex. If you've ever wondered if you can heal from an old relationship while you're in a new relationship, this episode is for you. In this episode, I'm going to share what the preoccupation with the ex is really about. Hint, hint, it's not about the ex. And give you some hope if you are in a new, healthy relationship and you still think about your ex, but you still kind of want to move forward at the same time. If that's you, this episode is for you. This episode is also for you if you're not necessarily focused on an ex, but maybe you are fantasizing about other people while you are in a relationship. This is very normal, especially if you've been in a relationship for a long time, especially if you're in a relationship where at the moment you're not getting certain important needs met. This is very common to fixate on someone who supposedly has what we're missing. So I'm glad that you're here. I'm also going to share a really, I want to say beautiful, but it's honestly quite a vulnerable story, but it's been a long enough time where I feel comfortable sharing it. So I hope that you find this episode to be helpful and healing for you and that you remember that you're really not alone in the slightest. I have this service called Wizio. It's basically my pick my brain function for those that want to get one-on-one support from me but aren't in the position to either financially or time-wise commit to a whole 3-month program. This is my way of supporting the community in a way that is still very personalized. And one of the most common things that comes up is this. I hear from people in these new healthy relationships, but they are still thinking and even grieving about their ex, and they feel so guilty. And sometimes they think that the thoughts and sensations that arise mean that they need to go back to their ex. In this episode, I really want to validate this difficult experience of healing from heartbreak while in a new relationship, while also sharing how taking these thoughts literally isn't doing you any good. It's even detracting from the beautiful life that's possible for you ahead. Yes, even if it's not with your ex, or as I said before, maybe a crush that you didn't get to pursue. Full disclosure, I'm going to preface this by stating that I personally do not have enough exes to miss. So, since I speak from personal experience, I'm going to speak on a love that I had back in high school, who was not an ex, but it was someone that I fell in love with and used to fantasize about. Even, yes, years into my relationship with Preston. I'm also going to speak on crushes that I've held in the past and what they were really about in hindsight, aka not about them and really all about me and the lives that I never got to live. So as I said, I've done several Wizios for people fantasizing about their exes, even ones that were chaotic and toxic and straight up avoidant and abusive. Not that all of these are related. These can be different categories of people. But this is common. This often happens when we enter a relationship with someone that is more regulated, stable, and predictable. We miss the thrill of the chaos that comes with the toxic person. Now, if we experienced consistent chaos in our childhoods, our nervous system is seeking out the familiar. Even though your conscious mind may want to change and build something sturdy and healthy and loving and reliable, your subconscious wants to stay in your old survival patterns where you have to be constantly proving your worthiness. Your subconscious wants you to stay the same. And this can be really difficult to grapple with. And it's important to find your resistance to moving forward in the direction that you say that you want. This is why I'm a big advocate for therapies like IFS or doing shadow work, looking into the parts of yourself that you are not even aware exist. You may say, I want to lose weight, but there's a part of you that does not want to lose weight. And it's important to find that part and get that part on the same page with the rest of you. This is why I teach a lot of shadow work in my online course, Both Feet In. You may say you want a healthy, cozy, stable, sturdy, loving relationship that you can build something with. But there very well may be a shadow part that wants nothing to do with this. And that part has a lot of power over us. And so we need to find that part, get to know it, get curious, love it, appreciate it for all it's given us, and free it to become a new variation of itself, an exalted version of itself. So maybe the free spirit internally that does not want to settle down, you can give it permission to exist in a new type of way, one that also honors a long-term relationship. But until we find our resistance, it's going to be very difficult for us to move forward. So once we understand that your subconscious wants to stay in your old survival patterns where you have to constantly be proving your worthiness, by the way, good question for you to ask yourself and your ego. If I don't have to prove myself, then what is the meaning of life? That's a good question to ask your shadow. Anyway, what if your ex wasn't toxic, but was a healthy, beautiful person and things just ended for some reason or another? I'm going to address that too. As I said before, there's no reason we can't also throw in the topic about dreams about the ex or dreams and fantasies about our crushes that happen outside the relationship. When taken at face value, dreams and day fantasies about others are literally about those people. But if we're willing to be curious and zoom out just a bit, we can explore how these people represent aspects of ourselves that need attention. It's really common to think that our infatuations are completely random. In my online course, Both Feet In, I cover several different angles. How our childhood history shapes our stories about ourselves, the deepest longings we have in life as a result of those stories, and therefore who we are most likely to get infatuated with. And if we're willing to use these, I call them crush mirrors, as a means of self-discovery, by keeping our eyes on our own papers, we can recover long-lost aspects of ourselves and return to a sense of wholeness without the other person ever needing to know or without needing to necessarily pursue a relationship with them. In fact, consciously, we might know that pursuing a relationship with them is not in our best interests, and yet there is still something to be learned about who we were when we were in relationship with this person. And a lot of times this is why they keep coming up in our minds. It's because there's still some, you could say, karma here. There's still something internally that needs to be resolved. That closure doesn't need to happen between you and the other person. That closure is actually a part of ourselves that's longing to come home. I want to share a background story that will help illustrate an example of what I learned about myself through one of the biggest crushes of my life. This is an example of the deep work I did around a boy I loved in high school. This work took me 10 plus years to do, and I finally consider myself fully, quote unquote, over him. Now, I want you guys to know that my husband Preston is my editor, and it sometimes makes me a little squeamish bearing my heart out for the world, but then also knowing that my husband listens to these things. And part of it is because it's more important to me to humanize my listeners and also humanize my husband, who has gone through his own variations of crushes over the 11 years we have been together. So please be gentle with me. These are tough things to share. So let's begin my story. Here's a real life example of what this work has looked like for me. So as you're listening, think about how this applies to you and what stories you have acquired about yourself through what you experienced in childhood and how that might have shaped what you were most likely to fall for. There is a book I read maybe 6 months ago by Robert Greene called Seduction, and I simultaneously recommend and don't recommend this book because a lot of these seduction tools could be considered narcissistic abuse, and there is a reason why narcissists tend to draw people in. It's because these seduction tools appeal to our woundings and our subconscious. And one of the things I read about in the book Seduction is that if you want to seduce someone, you have to figure out what their deepest longings are. And you can figure that out by noticing what their biggest unmet needs from childhood are, and then become the poster child for that unmet need, and boom, you have seduced someone. Now, that is a terrifying prospect. And I believe that there are ways that we can use this in a positive way, but I cover more of that type of stuff in both feet, and that is pretty advanced in my opinion. But I will give you some backstory. I hope you guys are salivating over the story because I'm very excited to share with you, but I'm also a little nervous, so I'm just babbling now. All right. My grandparents on my mother's side were Russian Orthodox Christians. My mom wasn't really a practicing Christian, but she was baptized sort of in a just-in-case sort of way, and she had a little bit of, I guess we could say, God-fearing in her. But by the time I came around, I never got pressured to be baptized, so I didn't get baptized. Occasionally, my mom would say, I think you should get baptized just in case there is a God, but I didn't. Meanwhile, my father was pretty anti-religion. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, before I moved to Southern California by age 8. And in Milwaukee, we had one car, and my dad would take my mom, who was a math teacher in high school, to work. And he and I had about an hour and a half to kill before I started school myself. My dad was self-employed, and I think back fondly on those memories. In that hour and a half between dropping my mom off at school and dropping me off at school, my dad and I would go do fun things in the morning, like go to the airport where I'd sit on his shoulders by the fence and watch the airplanes take off at the Milwaukee airport. Or we'd go grab a bagel at Starbucks or Einstein's Bagels. Now, one morning, I love this story so much. One morning over a Starbucks muffin, I asked, Dad, so you and Mom had me, and then your mom and your dad had you, and then their parents had them, and then their parents had them, but where did it all start? Does that make sense, Dad? Like, where did it all start? I was in first grade. Now, my father was a gregarious, larger-than-life, intuitive man led by his impulses. And he said, Honey, you're not going to school today. We're going to the Natural History Museum. And I was just shocked, and I thought my dad was the coolest dad ever. Like, no school, oh my God. The other kids were going to be so jealous. So we went to the Natural History Museum, and he showed me the diagrams of the theory of evolution. He showed me all the fossils and where we came from, the science of the earth, and all the archaeology discoveries, and how we evolved from primates and water beings and microbes. And he showed me all about the Big Bang. I mean, I was floored. And I was also convinced that God was not real. I was so puzzled why anyone would ever believe in God when the evidence was so clear to me as a 7-year-old that science had all the answers. Now, Milwaukee was, and I think still is, a relatively religious city with a large community that was, a lot of people would go sing the gospel and preach the gospel. I would go to school. I was like the only white girl there. Not that that makes much of a difference, but a lot of these other students had very religious parents. And so you can imagine what happened when I came to school that day and had this big announcement to a group of kids raised deeply Christian and said, everyone, God isn't real. It's all evolution. You've been lied to, and I can prove it. And I couldn't understand why everyone was so upset with me. I was trying to help. So after that, I would dive deep into the sciences and stay out of the spiritual realms. I studied biology and chemistry. I made fun of woo-woo people. And by the time I got to university, I was on my way to study chemical engineering, and then I pivoted and got a degree in pharmaceutical sciences. So I was still very heavy into the sciences and was anti-woo-woo anything. Now let's backtrack a little bit. This is Southern California. I'm in high school, and I fall madly in love with a Christian boy. This should have been my first inkling that I was not entirely anti-spiritual. But at the time, I refused to give much validity to his devotion to a creator that went beyond science. It felt like a betrayal to my father. I knew how proud he was of me for not falling for that spiritual mumbo-jumbo, although ironically, my father became spiritual while I was halfway through my pharmacy curriculum. Imagine that. Anyway, when me and Mr. Christian Boy were hanging out together, I gave myself permission to marvel at the wonder and the magic of life. And in his presence, I felt like I was connected to an aliveness in the universe that I didn't have access to anywhere else. I was also in a committed relationship at the time with an engineer, and I'm not proud to admit that there were late-night phone conversations with the other guy. Even a few years into my relationship with Preston, I still thought fondly about Christian Dude, and I would check his Facebook even though we were no longer Facebook friends. Now, there was a time when the romanticizing stopped, and it was when I got sick. I had acid reflux disease and IBS and a lot of autoimmune stuff that started to flare up, and Western methods were not healing me. So I turned to nutrition, yoga, and spirituality. Some of you guys who listen to this or have known me for the last potentially 5-8 years, you've been with me through this time. And there was a time when I swung the opposite end of the spectrum and completely denounced all Western lines of thinking. And I needed that. And today I operate more in the middle. Anyway, it's almost though, at that time, by integrating my spiritual side within myself, I didn't need Mr. Christian Dude to be that source of aliveness and magic for me anymore. So that was my story of how I overcame that crush. As I found him inside myself, the version of myself that was spiritual, so that I didn't need him to be my spiritual presence in my life. Here's some more examples. Years later, I developed a celebrity crush on this fantastic musician named Jacob Collier. And what were the qualities he had? He was a technical music whiz. He formulated a beautiful union of complex musical theory, mathematics, and music. Guess when that crush passed? When I started to practice and learn music theory myself. Now, here's another one. There was a time that I crushed on a man who was a powerful speaker in my Toastmasters group. For those of you that don't know, Toastmasters is a public speaking group. As I started becoming a better speaker myself, my crush subsided. We are drawn to relationships that help us become conscious of underdeveloped parts of ourselves. They will simultaneously be a thing we love at first and then potentially hate later. We will be inspired by and then frustrated with the characteristics that this person brings. So for example, someone who is fun will make you feel free and childlike until it comes down to make commitments. Someone who brings sturdiness and reliability will relax your nervous system until you find them boring. Someone with a strong sense of purpose will inspire respect in you until they're too busy for you. Someone with strong relationship values will make you feel safe and appreciated until you are feeling smothered. Obviously, these are oversimplifications, but I hope you get my drift. My point is that often what we are looking for in a crush is not the person themselves, but a vein of their character that we have forgotten to own within ourselves. And so with the ex, it is the same. There's a beautiful book I recommend that Cheryl Paul recommended called Recipes for a Perfect Marriage by Kate Kerrigan. And this is a fiction book. There are two parallel stories between a granddaughter and a grandmother who seemingly have so much different, and yet when you look at their diaries, they have a very similar story. And the granddaughter would constantly look at the grandmother and think, wow, Grandma and Grandpa had a perfect marriage. But once you look at the diaries of the grandmother, you see that she went through the same angsts that the granddaughter went through. So it's a really beautiful fiction book I highly recommend. And one of these women fantasized for decades about this one that got away while being in a committed marriage. I won't spoil the ending for you. It shows what marriage actually looks and feels like, and I consider it to be the anti-Hollywood love story, and it's still so beautiful. So that was a side note. But it's also worth noting that our ego loves a chance to prove itself as worthy. The ex is unavailable, and the ego loves the idea of being so extraordinary that it convinces someone unavailable to become available. We may love to see ourselves as considerate, logical people, and yet a very deep, maybe shadowy part of us wants to selfishly destroy what we say that we want and plow our way back to the karma/story we keep telling ourselves that we have to finish. We think that closure is what we need, but what we really need is integration. Not to finish this story with a happy ending, but to fully, humbly digest the lesson that was handed to us in the exact packaging it came in. Embedded in the preoccupation with the ex is often the idea that there's someone out there for us that will take us out of the angst and discomfort of being human. What if neither your current or past partner is going to fix or rescue you or take you out of the void? It has been so humbling for me to crush around endlessly, including on my own husband, only to realize every person I have crushed on is not real. These are crushes on not the person, but the assumption of the person that I have painted over the person. I have created a version of my ideal and tried to convince myself that my ideal is who this person is when they are not. I have projected a version of my ideal onto them because I need to believe that they are that person in order for me to trust that the one exists that will take me out of the void and the pain and discomfort of being human. And when I do that, all it will take for me to be disappointed is for them to take off their dating costume and stop pretending to be the projection that I created for them. If my sense of aliveness depends on my partner having a deep, disciplined spiritual practice, all it would take for them to kill my aliveness would be for them to stop having that disciplined spiritual practice. I'm going to reiterate that again. If me feeling enamored with them is dependent on them having a consistent spiritual practice, I'm going to be disappointed as soon as they stop doing that, because I have put my aliveness's responsibility in another person. And ironically, doing this will create anxiety for me in the relationship, because I will desperately need them to continue to be a certain way in order for me to feel a certain way towards them. And the truth is, I am not in control over another person. I can, however, make sure that I have a disciplined spiritual practice, independent of who my crush is or what they are or aren't doing. Let's say that I magically got to be with Jacob Collier, who represented an underdeveloped musical side of myself. Well, if I fell in love with him for his creativity, because I don't yet have that extent of creativity in myself, if he suddenly stopped being that creative person, I would not be in love with him anymore. So my aliveness that I got out of the relationship depends on him being the way that I need him to be, not necessarily who he is. And so how do I make sure that I continue to feel alive inside despite whether my crush is a musician or not? Well, I can cultivate that musical side within myself. That way, if my magical fantasy Jacob Collier boyfriend decides not to be a musician, I'm okay, because I have cultivated that in myself. To realize that there is no man or person out there that will do my work for me has been simultaneously the biggest liberation of all, but also the biggest heartbreak. Your now partner isn't responsible for your happiness, and your ex won't give that to you either. That happiness, that aliveness, it was all you all along. So, can you heal from a breakup while in a relationship? Absolutely. By recognizing that the pain is not from the loss of the person, but what part of you that you think you lost, and the vision that you created with that person. So relax your muscles and bones and realize that much of the suffering was caused by the clinging to one particular life path that you were so attached to, which makes sense. But all we have to do is soften that grip over this one reality we thought we had to have. And we may soften that grip somatically first, by relaxing our jaw, our bellies, and our bodies, and by practicing being open to our lives unfolding in a way that is beyond what we could have ever imagined. And this is why I believe having faith in a higher power is important. I used to use the word divine or intelligence or divine intelligence, and then I started using the word universe. Today I actually use the word God in my personal life. I pull aspects from Christianity and Buddhism in my practice. I wear the cross around my neck that my Russian Orthodox grandmother gave to me, both as a way to honor my personal relationship with God and to feel connected to my grandmother, but in a weird way, I'm also honoring that inner teenager that was in love with that Christian boy, that knew that there was something beyond statistics and data and numbers, that there is an unexplainable wonder that exists beyond the physical. And it doesn't need to make sense to anybody but me. And if you're struggling with relationship anxiety, or you're looking to your ex or your now partner and wondering which one's going to bring me happiness, it may be helpful to bring your eyes back onto your own paper and develop that relationship with something bigger than you. And nobody needs to know what your spiritual practice looks or feels like. I just share what my practice has looked like, but for some people it could be going to church, When my mother was going through her divorce with my father, she went to this little creek by our house, and that she used to call that her church. And that was, I guess, her spiritual practice, the place where she came to unload her anxieties and worries. So it can really be anything. You can let yourself be led by some sort of mysterious impulse and let that bring you closer to whatever you think the divine is. Having a relationship with God has allowed me to have more faith in the unfolding of my life amidst and despite uncertainty, which has been so important, especially if we're going to let go of a path that we thought we were supposed to be on. One of my biggest fears used to be that if I commit to my partner, my husband, that we'll get a divorce. And I'll have put all this work in, maybe even had kids with this man, and then we fall out of love and get divorced and we have to split our assets. And oh my gosh, how devastating that would be. And without having some sort of spiritual practice, that loss would feel so devastating and so meaningless. But because I have some relationship with a higher power, is having some kind of spiritual practice, I am now able to see that if that were to happen, there must be some lessons in store for me that God or the universe would have wanted me to have, and that it must be part of my process. So it's been really nice to trust that there is someone out there looking out for me, even if things aren't going my way. So I hope that you can give yourself permission to be the aliveness that you seek in the other, to rest in the knowing that these answers are not obvious, because life isn't actually meant to be that difficult. I know that sounds strange, but sometimes the decision is simple, but it's difficult. And sometimes both decisions are going to hurt, but both decisions are okay. Sometimes making a choice and grieving the lives that we're going to leave behind is the simple, hard thing we need to do. It might just be a leap of faith that hurts in either direction. It might be painful, but it might not be as complicated as you think. And that pain that you are choosing to feel through your decision, keep going and know that it will pass. You're doing just fine. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're looking for support, I'll be taking on some new one-on-one clients starting this month. I'll put some links in the show notes. There's an option to work directly with me for a few months. You can also submit a Wizio and pick my brain, and I will create a custom video response for you. You can also take my online course, Both Feet In. And last but not least, consider joining my Patreon community. I'm so excited about this, and we so far have 90 people in our Patreon group just over the last couple months, and it's been so rewarding. People are interacting with each other and realizing that they are not alone in the slightest of what they're going through. And I just love seeing your faces, and the people that listen to this podcast, seeing you be there in real time is just, I can't describe how wonderful it's been. So we do one call per month where I host a meditation, a Q&A where I try to answer 7 to 10 questions of the top rated questions. And I also started hosting a sharing circle. So it's not coaching, but if you want to share something, that space is there and other people can witness you in it and you can kind of offload. It's really very beautiful. So our next call is going to be on June 20th. If you can't make it live, you'll get the recording with all the timestamps to people's questions, and you can still submit your question before the call too. It's been so rewarding for me. I put so much thought into these, and I'm so happy to have a Patreon. I didn't realize how fulfilling it would be for me. So please consider joining. It's also a great way to fund these podcasts and keep me doing what I love the most, which is creating content for the masses to enjoy. So if you appreciate my work, consider becoming a patron. I would appreciate it so much. So I will include all of these in the show notes. And I am hosting quite a lot of retreats. Two is a lot for me this summer. And there's just a lot going on. So by the time you listen to this, I will likely be in Austria hosting my inner relationship retreat. So I'm hopeful that I can get you at least 3 episodes this month. But if not, join the Patreon. We'll have some time together and we'll add more to the next episode. Anyway, I'm just babbling. It's late night. I'm doing a late night recording and I'm ready to go to bed. All right. Well, thanks for being here. And until the next episode, take wonderful care of you. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day and talk soon. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to The Anxious Love Coach today. If you loved this episode, please hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and maybe share it with someone that you believe might benefit from these perspectives. Please also subscribe to my email list at www.anxiouslovecoach.com, as I'm trying to reduce my reliance on social media. In exchange, you will receive my free relationship anxiety meditation and more supportive tools sent your way. If you would like to work with me, head on over to my website at, again, anxiouslovecoach.com to explore different tiers of coaching options and online programs. Thanks again for listening, and catch you in the next episode. Have a blessed day.